coming under attack. And that's what we've been looking at in the last series when we talked about media credibility, and that's what we're talking about this time when we're talking about finance. And I'm really happy that we have such an excellent panel of experts here, of South African experts, and that we also have Philip Schwebel here, who just flew in from Berlin, particularly to join us at this event. Philip has founded 3 different media platforms that have all got different financing concepts, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing whether they actually work. So thank you very much for being here, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Oh, gosh, this is loud. Yeah, I'm waiting for my tweet to finish sending. Bring up my notes. Right, so good evening, everyone. I'm William Bird. I run Media Monitoring Africa. Thank you, friends. None of my family again. I mean, how many times do I have to tell them and invite them? But anyway, so please use the hashtag Future of Journalism. We do have some friends who are like family here, so that's okay. That'll do. Anyway, so this evening is a very cool topic. We've got a very cool and very exciting panel, and I'm going to start off. We're going to have an introduction from one of our very special guests who I currently am unable to locate in the audience. Oh, there you are. It's because she's sitting back there, not in the front. But before I get there, so when we look at media sustainability, there's the issues around financing and how it operates. And I wanted to just share something that we did. So I think about a year and a half ago now, we did some research for the Media Development and Diversity Agency. And it was looking at their impact over the last 10 years. And astonishingly, they hadn't done this kind of thing before. So when we did it, it was really getting a baseline. And we sent our colleagues far and wide. They went to all 9 provinces, and they interviewed people from, I think, over 80 of the different entities that the MDDA had supported. And we found a whole lot of really interesting things about the MDDA and a lot of really fabulous findings from there. But one of the other things that struck us was the nature of our media landscape and just how it mirrors, of course, the apartheid history that we have. So you've got very high levels of inequality, etc. But we also found that in some places there were media in the most impoverished villages that somehow managed to not just survive, but thrive. We also found media where our colleagues went and knocked on doors, and these were in relatively well-established urban areas where they found nothing. The people had gone, and there was nothing. And when we started going through all the interviews and after analyzing all 80 of these things, we found something that was really interesting that talks to us about media sustainability. And there were 3 key findings. So the one is that if you have a media entity that has a central person who has a mix of skills, so it's up to one person often, right? And that person has a mix of skills. So that person in most of these small media often is the bank controller, they're the finance manager, they're the operations, they're human resources, they're the editor, they're the reporter, they're the cleaner. They do a little bit of everything and they know a little bit about everything. And they also have a singular passion for whatever that entity is doing. So they have to have a mix of skills and they have to have a passion. And the third thing that they need is they need a good relationship with the community. And if you find any media that has those 3 things, they are sustainable, irrespective of the wealth or poverty or relative poverty or wealth of that community. It makes no difference at all. In other words, you find in the poorest places a small media that really shouldn't be surviving, but they do, and they thrive. And you also find media in far wealthier places that really have got extensive possibilities and markets, and yet they just about die, or very often they do die. And the thing that's common to them is those 3 elements. So when we think about media sustainability, especially when we look away from some of the big and look to some of the smaller things, there is something really there about how we think and understand what media sustainability really is in society. Of course, outside of that, we know that our media entities are really, really struggling in our environment at the moment. And another common factor is the role and importance of a public broadcaster, which is why in a few moments when I finish talking a little bit, I'm going to invite Patiswa to come up and talk about media sustainability, which is that around the world, wherever you have a sustained, supported, proper public broadcaster, your media environment tends to be healthier. You have higher levels of media freedom, and critically, you have higher levels of public trust. And so in South Africa, where we've gone through a very, very dark period with regard to our public broadcaster, I mean, aside from all the other things, you know, those of you that were following that crazy lunatic just last week and the lies that he was peddling, Tladi Motsoeneng, as he spoke before the Zondo Commission, it's easy to laugh at the man, but then to forget the damage and a huge, huge, almost irreparable damage that he caused to the institution and the people and everything in that body. So to rebuild a public broadcaster is good, not just for you know, South African public, because we need a public broadcaster, but it's good for the media environment as a whole. So it really is important, which is why when we were thinking and talking about this, we said we needed someone who would be able to come up and talk about our media environment from a range of perspectives, and also talk to media sustainability from a very particular perspective around public service broadcasting. And hence, it was an almost immediate choice that we wanted to get Patiswa to speak to us, because not too long ago she was with another media body called ENCA, which is a very different kind of media body and a very different broadcaster. So now, with just enough time, I'm going to invite SABC's Head of News, Patiswa Magopane, to come up and talk to us for a little bit about media sustainability.
Thank you, William. I'm glad I'm not going to talk about anything that you've just said. And as William has said, my name is Patiswa Magopane, and I'm an SABC News journalist, and I stand by my story. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Actually, I want to narrow it down to financing independent public service journalism, and that's what I want to talk to. The question that I want to ask, or the two questions that I want to ask, for whose benefit does independent public service journalism exist? And whose interest does an independent public news service, in this case SABC News, should serve? And as we talk about financing of public service journalism, I want us to consider where we locate our discussion. Are we talking about the sustainability or profitability of both? Or is it even desirable to talk about profitability when we talk about news media? And as we consider our perspectives on financing independent public service journalism, it is worth noting the following. We are talking about putting the citizens at the center of the journalistic endeavor and locating our journalism firmly in the lives of the citizenry. And that means financing this brand of journalism should be geared at delivering universal access to high quality news and information, creating platforms for public dialogue, and providing opportunities for citizen-driven conversations. And robust citizen engagement on issues of public and national concern is critical to the development of our society and strengthening our democracy. The task of a public news service is to create opportunities for citizens to talk about and have conversations about their lives, the spaces they occupy, their aspirations and dreams. Our task is to reflect the nation to the world to the nation, and the nation to itself, and do so without any hindrance. As journalists in public service, we constantly ask ourselves, what society do we envisage as a result of the quality and texture of journalism we deliver to the citizens? And delivering high quality delivering high quality, compelling, and independent broadcast journalism in particular is knowledge and resource intense. So, whose duty is it to foot the bill? SABC News is a primary source of news and information for millions of South Africans. We provide news services to 19 radio stations in 13 languages, including Kuntali and Kwedam, 3 free-to-air television channels, a dedicated news channel, and digital platforms. Our coverage has to reflect that we are not out of touch with the reality of the millions that we serve, who occupy different geographical, cultural, religious, socio-economic, and linguistic spaces. We are morally and ethically obliged to provide content that assists citizens to make informed decisions in their daily lives, be it subsistence or emerging commercial farmers who have to respond to changing climate patterns, the domestic worker who has to decide how much money to save to afford school uniforms for her children when the school term starts in January, or the investor who wants to track markets and decide which stocks present better investment opportunities. And in this regard, costly as it is, the public interest obligation calls upon us to provide independent journalism that is free of interference and censorship as a public good. We are further obliged to provide untrammeled news and current affairs content that reflects views that mirror diversity of voices in our country. Doing so ensures that citizens are appropriately well informed to participate fully in developing and enhancing our democracy. So, taking all this into account, can we as a country and citizens afford to have the public interest obligation eroded by financial constraints? To what extent are we concerned, if we really are, about the negative impact of not providing news content that serves the needs of the public and nothing else? Is there commitment and will to fund public interest content? Is the funding model, as well as policy and regulatory environment, enabling the SABC to honor what is effectively a constitutionally derived social compact between the public broadcaster and the citizens? Broadcast journalism is costly from the perspective of both editorial quality and technical resourcing. Therefore, how committed are we as a country to financing high-quality programming and compelling independent journalism? If there is no commitment to fund independent journalism as a public good, what is the cost to our democracy? What is the cost to social cohesion? What is the cost to human development and socio-economic transformation in the country? If we don't provide universal access to high-quality independent journalism and general content, what is the cost to the millions of South Africans who rely on the public broadcaster for news, information, entertainment, and education? What is the cost of not funding the coverage of the voices in the periphery of society to our democracy? Whose duty is it to fund independent public service journalism? We should all be concerned about the future of independent journalism and how it is financed. So how do we finance it?
Okay. So you said so many things in such a short space of time, I could barely keep up with my tweeting. So I'm sorry, they were just rubbish. You know, every time I started a new tweet, it would kind of end and I didn't even get it to make sense. So I'm sorry, we might have to ask you for a copy of your speech. What I'm going to do now is invite our guests to come up so that they can start to take their seats, and Francis can just do a bit of an introduction to them. We'll then have a bit of a pause for a few moments until we get word from SABC. We're due to go live at just after 7 p.m. this evening. But obviously before that, I need to make sure that I too also thank our wonderful partners, Goethe-Institut. Thank you very much for hosting us in your lovely venue. And of course to our lovely friends at the German Embassy who are fabulously good at fruit puns. Thank you very much for making all of these things happen. I didn't saw where that was terrible, right? Okay, so can we get our guests to come up on stage, and then we'll just introduce them to you, and then we can get ready to begin. So let me introduce Frances will be our moderator this evening. I'm sure you all know her if you watch SABC at about this time every evening. She's normally in the studio, but tonight she's mixing with us real people. Frances, good evening. Encourage your guests to come on.
Thanks. So can I actually ask that we just take a little bit of a break, and about 3 minutes past 7, we'll start. Either way, but we're doing that so that SABC can hook in. Maybe I should call up the guests, or should I do that in 5 minutes, William? What do you think? All right. So we can call everybody up so you kind of know who we're chatting to. Of course, Patiswa Magopeni will have to come up again. Where is she gone? All right, we'll grab her as soon as you can, Patiswa. Then we have from Berlin, Philip Schwabel, am I saying that correctly? Who runs Steady, which is a membership platform. So tonight he can give us some insight into something different. It's not subscription, it's not a paywall, but it works through members who want their publications that they care about to survive. So that's very interesting to me, and we're looking at new funding models. We have Siyabonga Africa, Program Officer, South Africa Media Innovation Program. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you are sort of mentoring online platforms who are now in a position where they have to make money and they have no idea how. And it sounds like the people you've helped are very diverse. So you have Daily Maverick, which I remember when Daily Maverick started, and we were all thinking, will this even survive? It was a purely online platform, not producing papers, not producing anything physical every day, and it worked. And then you have different members, sort of very small, niche online platforms trying to get there. So we'll ask Siyabonga about that. And Carol Mohlala, Executive Director, Association for Independent Publishers. And when you're up here again, we'll talk about that. So this is not independent media, but these are community-driven newspapers, mostly, Carol. And obviously there, you have rural communities who need their own local information. I mean, in all of this funding crisis, local communities, their issues have often been lost. But how do you fund papers in rural communities with very little funding to go around? So those are the panelists. Should we come up now, William? Okay, please come up. Take a seat anywhere you like. Oh, that's nice. Okay. All right, so before we kind of get into the discussion, I'm just going to ask you, I've given a little introduction, but we all met tonight, and some of you I obviously know more about. Can you just tell us a little bit about the work you're doing? So we're starting with Carol, and we're going to go down in about 2 minutes.
I've been introduced. I'm Carol Mohlala. I'm the Executive Director for the Association of Independent Publishers. So here we represent a group of community-based newspapers all around South Africa that are running to make sure that their communities are kept informed. So as an association, we provide them with a unified voice because their voice tends to get lost in the bigger scheme of things. And yeah, we also make sure that we offer them training to make sure that they keep their publications running. As William indicated, these people are they're people that are quite versed in what they're doing. And some of them might not have the necessary skills to run a business, but can write brilliant stories. So we try to bridge that gap. And my Twitter handle is quite an odd one. It is Dakiwa Sokola, meaning Black Lives Matter. So people can follow me there.
Say that again, Daki?
Dakiwa Sokola.
Wasokona. Great. Patiswa, we've already heard from you. Maybe I do think, even at the Zondo Commission recently, it's incredible. All the debates about SABC for many years, I think some people understand the distinction very clearly. But some people still struggle with the distinction of public versus state broadcaster. By the way, we even saw the finance minister in a document recently talk about the SABC in terms of being a national state broadcaster. Could you just maybe make that distinction clear? I think it'll be a nice introduction. Can you all hear Patiswa to the same level that you can hear me?
Okay. Actually, the distinction is easy. We just choose not to understand it for various reasons. And there's a particular sector of the society that chooses not to understand the difference. Public broadcasting is about the public. It's done in the interest of the public, and it serves the needs of the public. And it's about making sure that you serve the information and news needs of your citizenry, and it's meant to drive the conversations of the citizens, and it's got nothing to do with the state, it's got nothing to do with government. When we cover government, and it's something that we're invested in, we do it in the interest of the public. It's about getting the public to understand whether government is meeting the that they've made at the time of the election cycle that we get to see, depending on whether it's local government or national government elections. So it would be the two cycles that we tend to follow. So for us, it's to hold everyone to account, including business leadership. And also, it's not about delivering information as provided by government, it's about providing critical watchdog journalism and ensuring that everyone does what they have promised the citizens. I remember making this example, and I know it got me into a very interesting space, that in cases where editors find themselves having to assign reporters to go and cover a minister or a government official or a head of an agency that's cutting a ribbon or switching on a tap, that's a problem. It is not our job to do that. There are government agencies that are meant to do that job. It's not the job of a public news service to do that. Our job is to ask questions around whatever is being done. If after 25 years, it's only now that you are providing clean water to this community, tell us how you got to reach 25 years to deliver clean water to that community. And we talk to the citizens about how this water that's being provided 25 years later is going to assist them live better lives. That's the kind of journalism that we provide to the public, and not making announcements. It is not our task to do that.
Lovely, thank you. So Philip, you've been involved in a few of these platforms. Now Steady, just give us a quick background.
Great, thank you very much. So my name is Philip Schwabel, the one with the hard to pronounce last name. I am originally a publisher. I founded two publications in Germany. One is a pretty large online-only, ad-free, only funded by its members publication for politics. It's called Krautroporter, even stranger name. It's a little bit like the Daily Maverick here in South Africa, but probably not as important. And we struggled after the first year, where we got acquired some crowdfunding money with technology, with marketing, because we wanted to focus on the journalism. And we really had a hard time. And we found out that there are many publications, podcasters, magazines, journalists who had the same problem. And so we said, come on, let's do an initiative. Let's set up a company or a technology that serves the whole news economy and the whole news scene of independent media makers. And so that's what we did, and this is steady. And so we started 2 years ago, and over 550, I guess, publications in Germany and a little bit European are using Steady, so they can focus on their journalism, and we take care of all the marketing, the finance, the payment issues, all those kind of stuff. And I think there's even one South African publication with Steady. It's called Politics Web. Yeah, so that's what I do, and I want to say that thank you very much for the invitation. I'm learning a lot these days. Yeah, thank you.
We appreciate you coming in from Berlin to join us tonight. Siyabonga, a quick introduction, and then we'll kick off.
But they've got so much time. Hi everyone, my name is Siyabonga Africa. I'm the Program Officer for the South Africa Media Innovation Program. We are a media accelerator that's based here in Johannesburg. We are about 2 years old at this point. Time flies so fast. Our goal is to accelerate innovation and transformation in the media sector in South Africa. We believe that the big guys, your Media 24s, your independents, all of them have been ruling the roost, and we came in with the idea of disrupting the market and accelerating the small guys who really need the help. So I hope that's brief enough.
Thank you. So we may have viewers tuning in right now. Welcome if they are with us. And a reminder that this is a series of free discussions hosted by Monitoring Africa, Media Monitoring Africa, the German Embassy, and the Goethe-Institut. And it's all looking at the future of journalism. And without the funds, without the money, there is no future for journalism, or at least for quality journalism. There's very little scope for that. So tonight we'll look at new funding models. Research from around the world is showing, I think it's no longer a debate, but many journalists have lost their jobs because of the move to online. And it becomes this sort of downward spiral. So the less resources you have, the less journalists you have creating content, the less quality content you have, the less people who trust media, and the less revenue coming in. And it goes down and down and down. And we've seen in South Africa, obviously some of the online platforms putting up paywalls, and some of the others still struggling, some of them doing it, but some of them struggling to bring in the revenues from advertising and keeping their content free. So we'll look at new funding models, and then we have Patiswa here, who obviously has had to think a lot about the way public broadcasters should be funded. And I think it's worth just mentioning again that public means we serve the people of South Africa, their interests and their need for quality content and for understanding the world around them, as opposed to a state broadcaster that would be a mouthpiece for government. And that distinction is crucial. And I think we should also finally remember that media funding is not only about the sustainability of the press, of journalism. It's also about media freedom, to me, because you cannot have funds with strings attached. And the best bulwark against media bias and fake news and monopoly control is obviously a diversity of newsrooms, different views coming in, and then you need diversity of ownership as well. So I hope we can discuss that down the line. But let's hear from our panelists as well. And just an introduction again for those joining us. Siyabonga Africa, Program Officer, South Africa Media Innovation Program, SAMIP. Patiswa Magopeni, Head of News at SABC. Carol Mohlala, Executive Director, Association for Independent Publishers. And Philip Schwabel, I hope I said that correctly, CEO and founder of the membership platform Steady from Germany. And I'm going to start with a very easy question for all of you. Let's start with our international guest. Is there actually, are the problems around funding in journalism, is that a crisis? Is there a crisis in funding right now, Philip?
Yes. So thank you very much. Yes, there's a big crisis. There is a big crisis in print media, advertising going down massively. So for example, in Germany and all over Europe, the newspapers are shutting down. And we also have in the online sector a news crisis because the business model of ads is not working, because as advertising revenue is going up, most of the money is going to Google and to Facebook, and it's not coming to the local or small independent media outlets. And this has two severe consequences. The one is what you mentioned in your intro. People are losing their jobs. Newspapers are shutting down in the US as well as in Germany. We really have local news deserts, as we call them. So in the regions where my parents live, we used to have 3 local newspapers. There is none at the moment. So they're all shutting down. So this is a first severe consequence. The second one is, as everyone is striving for this media clickbait in online media advertising, it doesn't really do good for the journalism. So the journalism is distracted by the revenue model, and that's for sure a crisis. But I think we discuss the ways out of this today.
So let's move to Siyabonga, who was robbed for time earlier. Your view on the crisis.
I doubt you'll find anyone who will disagree with that question. There is definitely a crisis, and we have only so much time to actually figure out sustainable business models in the media space, and that's part of what SAMUP does, is with our grantees and our participants, is that we work with them in basically figuring out what is a sustainable business model, how can you bring in replicable revenue, which I define as a sustainable business model. And I'd add to what Philip was saying, that digital disruption is also key in this crisis. We are seeing a proliferation of platforms and no clear idea as to which one should we bank on. There was the pivot to video where we thought, oh, okay, let's put all our videos on Facebook and somehow we'll make money. That didn't work. Now there's a pivot to audio, and everyone's developing a podcast, and we're not sure if that'll work too. And now there's a pivot to paid or reader revenue, I should say, memberships, subscriptions, donations, crowdfunding, et cetera, and we are also not sure if that will work as well. So we're all trying to figure out, what is the magic formula? And I believe that will be definitely a mixture of different approaches, but it's all part and parcel of this crisis that we face, where there's no clear path to sustainability yet.
And Patiswa, we're going to focus on public broadcasting models, but I'll give you some reprieve, just kind of your general view on the problems around funding right now.
About a crisis in funding journalism or funding public content or content that's meant for the public are we locating the problem there? Is it not a problem of leadership in the media? Because one thing that I keep hearing is the business model has been disrupted. No, the business model remains the same. We are still in the news business. We still provide news and current affairs or news and information to the different target markets that we serve. What has changed is the profit or sustainability formula, and that's where we should be looking. And there are 4 things that you need to consider in that space. It's your revenue model. It is your cost structure, it's your margins, and it is your resource velocity. And until we address the 4, because our thinking is around the revenue model that we confuse with the business model, that has not changed, and we need to locate the problem where it is to be able to deal with it.
And Carol is passionate about those local voices. I think one of you mentioned often gets lost when there's not funding, sort of smaller communities and needing their own voice, their own publications. What do you think about the funding? Let's start there.
There is definitely a crisis, and for the smaller guys, the crisis has been looming for a very long time. And one of the crises stems from the big 4 not playing fair. And we cannot sit in this room and say that there's a funding crisis and ignore that the smaller players have literally been pushed out by the big 4. And if you look at our members, most of them will say that it's not that we do not get advertisers that are interested in the product that we are producing. But the moment that we get these advertisers, the local media in the area will then poach our advertisers and offer them the space for half the cost.
Sure.
You know, so that has been one of the biggest challenges that the local guys are facing.
I think let's explain this because, so you have big media houses funding small community newspapers. And you're saying they're giving the cuts, and then people who want to start their own homegrown sort of local newspaper are suffering as a result.
So we've got big media players that are running these local newspapers. So Custon is a big player in that space. So you find that Custon has a lot of local newspapers. You know, these are not necessarily community-based newspapers because obviously they have the big muscle and they carry the mandate of the big four. So we then have the smaller guys that are saying, you know what, we get that there is a local publication in this space, and 80% of the paper is filled with inserts, like from retail, and we would like to run our own publication that will reflect the voices of our people and actually tell the stories of our people. And those people cannot be able to run their publications sufficiently because they get shut down. Immediately they start entering the market.
All right, thank you for those opening. Can you all hear me? I don't know if my mic is on. Thanks for those opening statements. And Philip, I remember years ago looking at predictions on kind of where journalism was going, and people knew this funding crisis was coming. And some were expecting that people would seek out very good journalism, and they would perhaps be willing to pay for it. Quality would become the differentiator, and people would go and find it. Then we hear before the US elections, actually people were very non-discriminate and picking up whatever was coming into their Facebook feed or their social media feed and not going out and looking for quality. Is that too simplistic, or is that what the part of the problem is here?
I think you are right in that observation that the big platforms are taking over a curational role, which is not always to the best. So yes, that's true, but I think there's another side, especially if you're talking about the US election. We've been seeing that the big news brands that are trusted, Washington Post, for example, or the New York Times, they've seen really a terrific rise in subscriptions and memberships and people who are actually willing and wanting to pay for journalism. And I think this is the key. You know, people, they understand more and more that journalism is not a product, you know, that you buy, but something that is important for their lives. And they're actually willing to give money, and actually we just need to ask them.
So people are willing to pay?
Yes, more and more. And they're not willing to pay if journalism is just an one-off, another, you know, product. You know, if you just I'm lacking the word, but if you just get if you're just reading out press releases, you know, no one is going to pay for that. But if you do quality, investigative, high-level journalism, and if you, most important, try to build a relationship to your readers, to your audience, then they are more than willing to pay. And this number is growing.
And Siyabonga, you were talking about what's happening in South Africa. So there are paywalls. You said there are sustainable models. Just tell us what has been tried, what works and what doesn't work.
Phew. What doesn't work is probably the easiest one to...
Okay, let's start there.
What's been difficult, I should say. In the pivot to reader revenue, we've seen attempts at subscriptions. You have your TESOL Blackstar, we've put up hard paywalls for their Times Live products, and they are struggling in their own right. Even successful publications like the Daily Maverick have their own struggles in trying to meet budget, but are doing well by incorporating a membership model, which is, you know, a new approach at getting direct revenue from readers. So in terms of what is not really working that much anymore is the ad-supported content. We're starting to see huge declines in ad revenue, especially amongst publishers and with broadcasters. That's probably the biggest challenge we're facing right now, is that, you know, the ad dollars are no longer flowing to publications like they used to, and now we're competing, like Philip and my other panelists have said, with the platforms and with other conglomerates as well, who are able to undercut the smaller guys.
So then subscriptions, membership, all those things come into play, all the new ideas.
I'd rather look at them as tools than to say that, you should just stick to one. So you have some publications who are, playing around with the subscription model or with the membership model and saying, okay, we'll let you enter our site, for X amount of times before you actually have to pay something in order to access this content. Or we want to keep our journalism free, like the Daily Maverick, and in order to support that, we are asking for people to contribute and be a part of our journalism, which is the membership model as well.
And going back to my first question, what is actually working? What are the bright spots?
A diversified revenue model. That's probably the best approach. One where it's not contingent on one specific area, so you're not necessarily banking all your eggs on, ad revenue, but you're looking at developing commercial partners, you're looking at donor funding, you're looking at reader revenue, you're looking at a whole host of tools in that revenue generating field. Did
you want to add, Philip?
Yeah, I think what really works, I agree to most of the points, but there's one core element that makes all these tools successful when it comes to reader and audience funding. It's that media makers, podcasters whatsoever, are able to build a relationship that is built on trust with their audience. That is they don't consider them as consumers, but as on an eye-to-eye level partners in crime to make this journalism happen. And we find actually that many people are at the moment going to a membership-only model or a subscription-only model because they are so small that they cannot handle all these different revenue streams. But I mean, it's always good to have more than one thing. But it's actually working, and people are becoming members more and more, and it's really growing. With Steady, we have 500 publishers in Germany using Steady, and they grow on about 18% a year, each of them. So it's really going up.
Maybe it's time to just describe this new way of doing things. How does membership, your platform, helps different publications gain members, I understand. How does that differ from subscriptions or whatever else is going on?
Yeah, so actually we have three basic reader-funded models: subscriptions, donations, and membership. Subscription is where you really buy a product as a consumer and you have to pay for something like that. So this is Netflix or Amazon Prime Video, whatever. So it's you buy something that you really want. That's a subscription. The problem with subscription is that you have a very high churn, so you lose very easily your customers, because if someone else is giving a better price, then you lose them. The second thing, which is donations, contributions, The Guardian is doing that very well. That is
on a voluntary basis.
It's on a voluntary basis. Actually, in the beginning, it's based on purpose and the mission. They really like that. They want to fund that. And this is good because it's based on the purpose and the passion. I think William said that it's based on the passion, right? And they really want to go with that passion. The problem with donation is that it's mostly one-off. It's not very sustainable. You give once to make something happen, but it's not recurring in the most time. So the combination about these two things, donations and subscriptions, that's what we call. I mean, I didn't invent that, right? So there's a scene, a revolution, I might say. It's a combination of those two. It's called membership, and this is for people who really want to make something happen. So they go with a passion, with a purpose of a publication, and they get something in return. That is maybe sometimes even a paywall, where the paywall grants exclusive or earlier access, but it can be a means of getting involved with the editorial team. You can vote, you can do surveys, you can do offline events like this. All these tools, is something that a publication can give back. So if you have these two things, if you have a purpose, a strong mission, and if you're giving something back to your readers and your audience, then membership works really, really well. And this is, I mean, there are numerous things. You know that too. It works, and it could also be something, for other medias around the world.
All right, Patiswa. So if anybody is living the funding crisis, it is the SABC. I think it's public knowledge. The SABC has said we've run out of cash, and you've got to deal with that, the resource constraints. Do you mind telling us a little bit about how that affects what you're trying to do right now?
Something as basic as not being able to get the skills that you require to produce the content or the quality of the content that you want to produce, and that's meant for your public. That's a big thing. And it's also the fact that we're trying to drive conversations and that citizens get to engage in these public dialogues about issues of provincial, local, and national concern. You are not able to deliver that at the scale that you would want to because of the resource constraints. One thing that is a huge problem, it's the fact that you have an entity that relies on advertising, classical advertising and sponsorships. If you look at the fact that 84% of our revenue comes from that, and you have 13%. I
think it's worth repeating, 84%
yes,
of SABC's revenue, yes. Not government, not licenses, but from advertising revenue.
Heavily dependent on classical advertising and sponsorships. And 13%, is your license fee collection. And 3% is a government grant that's meant for educational and religious programming. 3%. And if you look at the 3%, it doesn't even cover half the salaries of the news division, because the salary bill for the news division is sitting at around 650 million rand, 650 million rand. So if you talk about something close to 300 million rand, that's exactly where you're looking. So one of the problems with heavily relying on advertising is the fact that even though your advertising sector may not dictate what you do, there is a tendency to want to lean towards what they prefer in the way you produce your content, because it assists you to generate revenue. They may not dictate, but because you know that you will get the money that you want if you sort of gear your programming towards what they are looking for. And it's a huge problem. So it's actually similar to any other form of interference, even though you may end up doing it without being told. The other issue is the fact that when you look at what is being presented as solutions to the problems that news media is facing, like your paywalls, you cannot put public content behind a paywall. It's meant to be available to the public. You cannot do that. Yeah. So it is not an option for us. And that applies to the membership that you're talking about. Every citizen who relies on the public broadcaster for content is a member. So there's no exclusivity in that space. So there are other things that we have to think about in terms of how we innovate in a manner that assists us to generate revenue. I mean, one of the things that we are looking at is using our facilities to generate revenue. Even though it's not something that we are going to see results, substantial results immediately, but it's something that we need to look at. You have these vans that are parked somewhere in Auckland Park, and you look at them and you say, over the weekends, what do? They do nothing. Over the festive season, you have a whole December period when they are parked there. It's the cost of warehousing them, the cost of providing security so that no one touches them. So what do they do during those periods? What are the options that you have? Can you harvest all of that and set up a separate business for broadcasting facilities that you can hire out and generate revenue differently and have a different business model that runs parallel to what you do?
Sell South African news to Africa, to the world? Could the SABC get involved in it?
So you can do that as innovating from the core. And you can also look at your adjacent businesses, which is about your segments that are underserved, that include your African languages market. We are not doing enough in terms of providing content to our African languages segment. The fact that we still rely on linear television as an appointment viewing at 7 o'clock, at 5:30, and this is the only time that we provide news content to those communities, it's not right. It is not right. And if you look at again, boosting your capacity to generate classical advertising. If we were to do more of that and service that market with the same intensity that we service our English audiences, you are likely to see something else.
Is there, I mean, I heard murmurs when people realize how much the SABC is reliant on advertising. And a lot of people are questioning the whole model, whether it works. So the SABC has a public mandate. It should be going out into all communities, rural communities that aren't paying, won't sort of generate advertising revenue, and not only focus on the urban dwellers with the cash and sort of feed their needs. The overall model, is it sustainable, or should South Africa be looking at something completely different, a complete overhaul?
I think it's in how we work on what we have currently. So it's a sponsorship, it's the government grant, and your advertising and sponsorship revenue. So if you were to elevate some of the aspects, look at your government grant and raise the level of contribution at that point, you are bound to see a different result. But again, when you do that, there are fears of interference, that should we start becoming dependent or getting more contribution from that side, there's bound to be interference, there's bound to be things that get dictated in terms of what we cover. But the thing is, even at 3%, we have seen interference. We have seen the kind of things that we don't want to see. So how robust are our assumptions regarding what government contributes? And when you look at the level of interference. So is it conclusive that if you don't get money from government, there will be no interference, if it happens at 3%?
Sure. Carol, I want to come to you, but very quickly, is there a good model out there? I mean, is there a best practice model for a public broadcaster in the world that we could follow?
We can look at international practices. We can look at what you would see as an international benchmark. But is our situation conducive for that? Because we have to look at our realities. You have to look at the stage of development of our country and what we are trying to achieve with public broadcasting.
Philip, you wanted to jump in. I told the panelists they can jump in if they want to disagree with each other on any points. Or you can agree.
I don't want to disagree because I couldn't. Everything you said is perfectly correct. I just, wanted to take the opportunity to say that we are in Germany we struggle with our public broadcasters a lot, but this is on a very high level. And we are, in Germany, it's the opposite round. So we have 3% probably advertising revenue in public broadcasters, and people want to get even rid of that. And the rest is, not membership finance. We are forced to pay for it. So it's not a grant by the state, but it's an Abgabe. I not really know what that is. But so we are forced to give a little money to the public broadcasters, and in combination with the private broadcasters, we have a really high standard of journalistic content. So this really works, the system. We call it the dual system, and we have really high, level of free speech, free media, and stuff like that. So it's really the opposite. I had really, as you said, you have 3% from the state. We have 3% probably advertising revenue.
Yeah. And it's encouraging what you say. We heard earlier from William Bird that a good public broadcaster, trusted and respected, actually helps the whole milieu of journalism in a country. Siyabonga, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I'm going to be a bit controversial, Patisa. Not to disagree, but to add an observation in that you said that SABC consumers, everyone is a member. But we don't feel like it. It's the relationship between the consumers of public broadcasting, it feels transactional. Like when you ask us to pay our TV license, it's like, this is another DSTV license, but I don't get SuperSport. And the area or the opportunity that we're missing is audience engagement, which Philip was touching on, in that we are not engaging, or the public broadcaster is not engaging or showing an engagement with its audience to show that value proposition that we are improving your lives in what we're doing. I think that's an area where the SABC can improve it.
You are completely correct. And I made reference to the social compact between public broadcaster and the citizenry. It is not there. And it's something that we need to work on. The fact that we sit in all these platforms and try to convince people that we are actually a public news service is a problem in itself. So it talks to the non-existence of that social compact and how weak that is.
And is the lack of resources, the funding problem part of that, or is that a cop-out?
It is not a lack of resources. It's something else that we need to do.
Something that has to just change.
It's something that we need to pay attention to, because we need to get to a point where citizens actually understand that they own the public broadcaster.
So let's bring Carol in here, because this is about small, so this is Association for Independent Publishers, nothing to do with independent media. These are small community newspapers. So we were talking about rural communities that the SABC should serve. Of what's happening out there on the ground.
Before I give any examples, am I the only one that picked up that Mr. Motwening sold our archives for less than even half of the SABC News staff budget? Goodness me, that is a shock. We could have gotten more, we could have funded the SABC for years by selling our archives.
Okay, so that is a minefield which we can start talking about, but it'll take the next half hour. So I first want you to tell me about local newspapers. And not that I'm saying we shouldn't bring it up, you can address it. But I want to get to these rural communities as well.
So sustainability in the rural communities has been something that has been quite interesting, and is always, our members are always quite innovative. And one way they have become, most of their members that are very successful are the ones, as people have mentioned here, that are in touch with their communities, where the community feel that they are part of the publication. So we've got one publisher that does Stokvel Talk. So the main aim of the newspaper is to talk about stokvels. And we know how big stokvel market is in South Africa. And how he does this is, he doesn't say, I'm just going to sit in my office and write about this. He actually engages these stokvels, and he brings them into one room and say, let us tell your stories. What are the challenges? What are the wins? And hosts road shows, get sponsors for those road shows. And through that income, then he manages to run his publication. And his publication is for free. So he also understands that, I'm also servicing communities that cannot actually pay for certain content. So I'm going to use this opportunity to bring those that can pay into the room and use that money to make sure that I generate information for the community. So that is one of the examples.
So tell us more. I mean, are there any opportunities for the big players who are struggling to learn from what local community newspapers have had to do because of a lack of funding?
One of the biggest things to learn is to always keep in touch with your people. I find it very, very, very difficult. In fact, I have nightmares before I actually have to pay my TV license. Because I don't feel like I'm part of the SABC, But if I were to pick up, I know that I've gone through those moments with local newspapers where I'll be like, I didn't pay, but who's running this, Can I offer a service? Can I give you guys money? Getting in contact with your people, understanding what they want, and also making sure that they understand that they own the product along with you. So there's this big separation in media thing. There's the haves and the have-nots. And this does not apply to SABC alone. Also, the Big Four does that, They know that they have muscled their way into...
I think you need to name the Big Four, because you've mentioned them a few times. Who are you slandering?
I'm going to remain unemployed for a very long time. So when we're saying the Big Four, we're talking about Media 24, which also, it has also owned the entire Afrikaans market. So all of the Afrikaans big commercial papers are owned by Media 24. It also has a very big magazine market. So it has a monopoly around that. And at some point, it's owned by Naspers, and Naspers, we know, owns DSTV. So there's those dynamics that we really need to look at. We've got Segunjalo that used to be called Independent Media. They've changed their names a couple of times, and I think they were way better when they were called Independent Media than now when they're called Segunjalo. And then we've got Tiso Black Star. We know that because of their financial challenges, they've also been sold. I'm sure by November we'll be hearing about a new name. They used to be called Avulsa. Before that, they used to be called something else. I've forgotten. They've changed, And we've got Mail and Guardian, which was what we call in township language, the one that went to Model C. The top of the cream, the one that we looked out for, the one that we had hope that would do best in the sector. And they too have faced a couple of challenges, and they've changed ownership. Lucky enough, they have not changed their name. I thought after changing ownership, we'll see a new title name, but they've relatively remained the top four.
And you did mention, I don't know if this exonerates them from not supporting local communities, but some of them are donating money or some resources to your organization. Am I correct?
How the sector should work, and I feel like I'm giving a lecture, how the sector should work, how it was initially supposed to work, is that the Big Four were supposed to contribute to the Media Diversity and Development Agency. So they were supposed to give certain funds to the agency so that grassroots, community, independent publishers benefit from that fund. And MDDA has said publicly that they are struggling to get that money. And we know why they're struggling to get that money. They too are not innocent. I think the big players are saying we can't give our money to an organization that has not gotten a clean audit in over 8 years. So they too also have challenges. So when, I think in 2011, when we had the print media task force, they all pledged to say that even though we've said that we are not really at a point where we are comfortable to give the money to the agency, we are going to pledge either resources or some finances to the community independent smaller publishers. And that's how they donate to the AIP. And that usually trickles down to our members where they also get those benefits.
Okay, so it sounds like you want more.
Yes, we want more.
Let's say. Siyabonga, let's come to you, so we're talking about the shift to digital, what it means for everybody. You're part of this program, Accelerating Digital Media Innovation amongst outlets, and I think it's some of the smaller outlets. You did work with the Daily Maverick. So how important is that knowledge in South Africa right now of your different options, what you can do? And tell us how you help.
Yes, so I'm going to start with a fact check. MultiChoice owns DSTV, and it's spun off into its own organization that's listed on the JSE.
Yeah.
So
true, very recent though.
very
recent.
And also, Mail and Guardian, whilst is a big brand, trust me, is not as dominant as it used to be in terms of market share, and it definitely is a struggling organization. And they actually are part of our program as well. They recently were added to our program, and what we're helping them do is transition to digital better, actually, to almost mirror what the Daily Maverick has done in becoming a digital-first publication. And in terms of what SAMUP does is that we onboard small organizations that we see promise in, whether it's a startup or it's an organization that's been around for less than a year or so. If we see promise in it, we will onboard them into our program. We provide funding in the form of grants as well as technical assistance. We also provide mentors. You said at the beginning that I mentor them. I mostly act as the program officer and I coordinate them along the path of our program. But we do mentorship, we do capacity building, we organize workshops, we try to impart new knowledge, we upskill them in areas that are incredibly important these days, like native advertising, subscriptions, memberships was a recent training that we did, as well as how to fundraise outside of getting grants from us. Where else can they get donor funding which can assist them beyond the program that we're running?
And you mentioned digital first. Is that the reality? You have to be digital first?
Not necessarily. It's been playing in the digital field is a must because we're seeing audiences transition into that field, but let's not discount analog. That's your newspapers, your radio, your TV. There's still, especially in a country like South Africa, where a lot of our populace consumes their first media experience, chances are will be radio. We are still playing in that field. So what we're trying to do as far as digital first goes is that we're trying to help those who are playing in that field to also take advantage of other digital areas like podcasting or online TV or online video, I should say. Yeah. So that's where we come in.
Yeah. Patricia, go ahead.
I'm listening to Sia talking about the digital platforms. It's an area that we're looking at. In April, we launched our news app. And this news app, it's basically our transformational innovation because it was meant to change the way we do business. And it's also tracking consumption patterns in terms of how news consumers are tracking news content. So if you look at that, the news app carries all 19 radio stations, and it has the 24-hour news channel live. And it also has our .com in it. So you can read, you can watch, and you can listen to the content that you find. So it's a portal
to everything that SABC offers.
Yeah. So it deals with two things, immediacy and your accessibility, ease of access of the content. But the cost of data, it changes the entire thing. So you have this brilliant digital platform that's meant to solve your problems and the problems of your citizens that consume news content. But you cannot achieve anything with the cost of data that we experience as South Africans. So you basically have people where they should be watching the news content on the news app, watching the news channel. They would rather go to YouTube and look for live content if it's there, because it's better going that route than consuming the content on the news app. So there's something else that needs to happen there, and it's a policy issue that needs to be dealt with.
So this, let's clarify, it's not the cost to the SABC of running the app, it's the cost
to the consumer.
People on the ground. Yeah. And what a pity, because we know in South Africa, people go to phones before they get a laptop, and consuming on your phone is an incredible resource. You wanted to come in, Karen?
Yeah, can I just add on that? It's not only the cost of data. I was saying during the day to Nadia at the NAB to say that one of the biggest mistakes that we made as a sector, be it broadcasting, print, or civil society, is that when digital first came up and all these conversations were heard, we never actually sat down in those commissions or sessions where telecoms were discussed. We completely missed out on the issue around infrastructure, on the issues around cost. And now only when we have the products that we need to try out, then we are realizing this is a huge problem. Now we have to go back and try convince the policymakers when we were not involved in those conversations to say, we really need to look at the infrastructure. We really need to look at the cost. So we really missed out. And it's a point that we really actually, as a sector, we have to come together and work out a solution.
So this is the cost of data. I don't know if you want to... Yeah, Bonga. Does this count across a whole lot of different publications in South Africa?
Most definitely. I mean, what you're seeing with South African news consumers is a calculus that goes on in their head whenever they are confronted with a product that they want to consume. It's, do I consume this, or do I use my data instead to chat with my friend on WhatsApp? Do I go to a news channel on YouTube, or do I look at these, different videos which I get utility out of? So it's the cost of data, but also on the publisher side, it's how do we actually put our value proposition in such a way that it's compelling enough that people realize that what we are offering is worth their time, is worth their data.
And maybe the Daily Maverick is one of the examples. You were all talking about connections with the actual content consumers. Does that make all the difference in the end?
It definitely does. I'll just quickly say before Philip jumps in. I mean, they went through a process of really engaging with their audiences to better understand them, which is also something that I highly recommend to anyone in the publishing field, is to actually go in there, question, survey, get all those details from the people that you're engaging with to better understand them. That way you can put a product or develop a product that actually makes sense for them. So the Daily Maverick realized that, you know, we are a digital-first publication, but what do people want? They want truth. And so what should we really put as our value proposition? It's the fact that we report truth. So they were able to sell that. And in selling that really well, it got them the audience, it got them the members that is helping drive their revenue.
Philip?
I wanted to say that. No, but honestly, as your initial question was, you know, what kind of crisis we are actually facing, you know, the funding crisis. And we all spoke about, you know, the business model and the advertising and those kinds of things, which is true, as we know. But there is one very important factor, and this is the same in Germany, and obviously here too. It's about a crisis of journalism itself. Yeah, so journalists need to change too. They need to redefine their role. They need to go away from, you know, just presenting the truth, you know, and, you know, writing something and then tell, here, this is God-given the truth, right? But it's about an eye-to-eye conversation. I think you said that, right? This is the goal, yeah, and it's journalists are more and more conversation leader and not, you know, storytellers. Yeah. So, and this is the first step of, you know, building, for example, local community projects that are funded. If you have this, you know, if you have this view to journalism or membership programs or whatsoever, and I strongly believe that journalism needs to change as well. And I know that traditional media, legacy media, print or broadcasting, for them it's most challenging because they are so used to, you know, broadcast, yeah, and there is in TV little interaction, you know. So I didn't hear this word. You said that, I think, but I'm missing a little bit, you know, the call for entrepreneurs, you know, to set up new news companies throughout the country. You know, you should encourage people, you know, to be an entrepreneur in news and to try and do things. It's
even if it takes away people from the already struggling outlets.
Yes, do try things and don't be, you know, don't be afraid to fail, maybe, yeah, because you're doing it for a very good cause. And it's very easily said, I know that, and we in Germany people are not, you know, jumping and do things, you know, every day ourselves, but I think this is a key thing. We need to sustain the whole news ecosystem. We need more entrepreneurs who are trying to do things. And yeah.
Sorry, I wanted to quickly agree with Philip there, and that entrepreneurism is desperately needed in news media, especially in the South African media industry. Looking at our program, of the organizations that are startups, most were developed by business people or technologists, and very few were from journalists. I mean, that math no longer.
That is strange, yeah. Patricia?
Something that Philip made reference to, it's the news consumer ecosystems. But when you say that broadcasting is not necessarily in that space and that we just used to broadcasting, it's not actually what we are doing now, because we have realized that there's power in being on digital platforms and getting consumers to engage with your content. But what I have seen, even outside broadcast media, is that we just leave audiences to talk to themselves on digital platforms. We are not engaging with them as the people who have produced their content. So there is no conversation that takes place there. We allow them to shout at each other and disagree, but no one is actually there to say, but this story was about this community, and this is what it meant. That is not happening in the way we create the ecosystem. But also, once you pay attention to the ecosystems, you actually create a network effect, which is what you use as a currency to advertisers, because you have created an environment where everybody converges on your platform or your ecosystem, and they come and have conversations there. And that's what we need to drive.
I'm glad you raised this, because I was going to say, we say social media has disrupted traditional media, but SABC does put clips out on YouTube. There's a lot of Twitter interaction. I think our digital platform is brilliant.
It's brilliant, but it's
underrated.
What
People
it's
don't know what we're doing. Yeah. Okay, so you're just saying you can go so much further, but you can harness what is out there already.
It's not just about dumping content on digital media. You need to get people to engage with the content and ensure that the engagements are moderated, and we're not doing that at the moment.
I'm going to, just by show of hands, are there any questions in the audience? Okay, so a few. I'll come to you very shortly. Let me just bring Carol in. Is there we've been talking about it in all of this, local journalism being lost and being the first to kind of go. Is there a hunger? Do people hunger for news about their suburb, about their community? Is that there, and are we ignoring it?
Yes, there is a huge market for such in South Africa. There is people that are really desperate to tell their stories and for their stories to be told through their own voices. And if you look at one of our publishers that are doing quite well, the language issue is a big thing. One of our publishers that is doing very well is super proud about the Sepedi dialect. Publishes his paper, no apology whatsoever, in pure Sepedi. Even the website is in Sepedi, and he's doing so well because he saw that, there is a need for the local community to tell their stories, to hear their stories in their own language, and to also get that engagement.
So maybe smaller, but it's loyal following. Let me just see if we can get a mic to the lady in front here. Here we go, it's going to come. You can jump in quickly, Siyabonga.
Just to concur with Carol, we're also speaking with our participants. One of David's publisher in KZN is a Zulu publisher in Zulu Press, and they publish newspapers in the rural belt as well as in the urban sector, and they are pure Zulu. Like when I had the content assessed, they said that this is really upper class Zulu, but people are engaging with it, they love it, and they want it. So we are missing, like Patricia said, that opportunity in catering for vernacular languages.
All right, ma'am, go ahead.
I would just like to ask you, aside from the daily dispatch, which I think is marvelous, I think you're not talking about the absolute crisis of credibility that we as consumers have felt so terribly betrayed by the SABC, by top English-speaking newspapers, all of which have been captured, and to start again, to have faith and a sense of confidence in what you're producing. And of course, consumers who followed the news all their lives, which I have, there's a huge loss of faith. And surely that has to be addressed. I mean, just following the state capture now, God, what happened, and how can I ever believe them again? Yeah. And surely that is a huge crisis. Nobody's talking about it, but surely it's central to every debate about, staying alive as papers or broadcasters. How do you get back that moral integrity so that people believe again?
Well, that's your uphill battle. You can start.
I fully agree with you. And we know that we are facing an uphill battle to try and convince news consumers that we are now getting it right. It's a huge battle for us. But there's one thing that we know. Ethical conduct in journalism is a competitive advantage. That we know. And we need to go back there and fix things. But to come and make an announcement that we have now changed. It's not going to convince you. You need to see that in the quality of the journalism that we produce. Yeah.
If I can ask Siyabonga quickly, because also, I mean, what's coming out in the Zondo Commission, some people have pointed out, has actually been through investigative journalism sort of revealed back in time. And we have these strong investigative journalism units. But, you know, then does clickbait work, or is there a hunger for that sort of journalism as well, truth-telling, like you were talking about?
I think different news consumers have different habits. I mean, I have to agree, ma'am, that credibility is definitely an issue that we need to address across the board. It's not just the SABC. And in order for news media to survive in the 21st century, you need to get your convergence right, you need to get your content right, and you need to get your credibility right. And only then can you actually see any progress. And in terms of just the content itself, going back to your question, Francis, you know, is there a hunger for investigative journalism, or is it clickbait stuff? What we found is that if you are able to basically attract an audience that prefers that and actually engage with them, that is worth more than 50 million readers who just are clicking on your site and going on for one story and leaving. If you get those people to come over and over again, and that's only contingent on providing them with good content, that's, you know, whether it's investigative journalism or explainer journalism, climate change journalism, that's what creates that really engaged audience that is key in this digital era.
So it's about trust. Can we get put a show of hands? That man behind you and you.
Well, that is the event that's happening at the Goethe-Institut in.
Yeah, this is probably not a solution for the public broadcasting, but to give you an example about in one initiative in Germany, we have the credibility problem as well. And so what we did with the medium I founded, Counterpotter, which is this member-funded magazine, like Daily Maverick, we sold it to our readers, actually. So we founded a cooperative, and we were 3 founders in the beginning to, you know, get it going, and then we sold it and asked people to, you know, sign up and, you know, buy shares, whatever, from this cooperative. There's a one man, one woman, one vote policy in the cooperative. So I think you can secure and change the matter of credibility by also changing ownership. So just as an example, what we did, and it really works well.
No, nice point. Go ahead.
To Patiswa, is it completely inconceivable that the public broadcaster could not charge for content? So, for example, the treasure trove of your news archives, or whatever's left of the archives that weren't sold, my understanding is it's only what went to Encore. But is it not conceivable that still, with providing universal access to all of your content, that there isn't, for example, some value-added content that could be charged for? So it's not as if you're taking away from your public, but you're actually charging for an incredible resource that is at the broadcaster. So the app that you mentioned, for example, for those maybe outside the country or so on that could pay for it, and even those in the country who are prepared to pay for a value add. And if I may, Francis, the gentleman from Germany mentioned public broadcasters as opposed to a single public broadcaster. And is that perhaps also not a model to look at for South Africa? Do we need a single sort of monolithic, or is it conceivable that there could be one or more publicly owned entities producing public interest content or meeting the sort of mandate of the SABC?
I think on the first point about archives, it is something that we are doing. We are licensing it to interested parties, and so this is how we try and monetize our archive system. But the reality is we're still struggling with the format of the content, which remains largely in analog, and people are looking for a different format. So there's still a struggle there, but it's something that's being addressed. And where you talk about another entity that will provide a similar service to the public broadcaster, is your view that it would be a separate entity from the SABC? Or is it splitting up SABC and saying, here's one wing that's going to deal with your public service content and the other wing that's going to generate commercial revenue? Or are you looking at a completely separate public service entity? Is the size of the population accommodative of that? If you're looking at the fact that we're sitting at about 54 million people or so in the country, and with your independent broadcasters or other media entities, will it be sustainable if you were to introduce another one, considering the size of the population? Yeah.
And the economy.
Yes, exactly.
Show of hands, could we just, maybe that gentleman who's being pointed at.
Hi, Michael Markovitz, I'm an SABC board member, and in the interest of fact-checking, let me just make it absolutely clear. The archives have not left the building, or those that we know. They were not sold to MultiChoice. What it was a licensing deal, and that deal has expired. The SABC owns its archives. The public should know that. And as Patiswa said, in fact, it's seen as a key potential revenue stream down the line, because if you think about it, those archives are our national treasure. We are digitizing them at the moment. It's a very expensive process, but I think once we digitize, there's opportunities to create channels out of the various archives, not just news channels. So that's very important. I think from a trust point of view, we need to just say it. The archives are owned by the SABC, full stop. Secondly, I think on the trust thing, it's going to take time. You can't expect that after the SABC has gone through what we all know what it's gone through, and then overnight people are going to just flock back to it. It's very easy to break trust. It's much harder to rebuild it. And I think under Patiswa's leadership in terms of SABC News, we've made a start. We're doing a great job. We've got a very good review by MMA on our coverage of the elections, but it's just a start. And I just think that it is a process. I don't agree that there can be more public broadcasters. It's hard enough to fund our one, so I wouldn't support that. But I do think that trust is very important. And lastly, just on the point of charging for our content, I think we really have to be free. You know, what is our competitive advantage apart from the license fee, which people don't really pay for the content, it's a license fee. I think we need to be freely accessible. Pay TV already dominates 8 million out of 14 million households. So what is our advantage as public broadcast is to serve people and to be freely accessible, and I think that needs to continue. Doesn't help the business model, but it's important from a policy point of view.
All right, thank you very much, Michael. The gentleman in front of you, if you can go ahead.
Hi, so sorry. So I just have a remark regarding the digital media. So what I would have liked to hear is the security for digital media, you know, on top of the crisis that is being discussed, with finance being an issue. So if you're a small organization trying to get into digital media, I was a victim of cybercrime. I founded Ram Online, a media company for online media. So we were a victim of cybercrime, and I'd just have liked to hear more about security surrounding that, you know.
And the Mail and Guardian was taken down the other day, and there was a whole issue around that. Can anyone respond to that? That means it's you, Siobhan.
No, I mean, I think that's a question of getting your technology stack right. And it's about, you know, sharing best practices amongst the community. So when we look at the people that we fund or the organizations that we fund at SAMUP, we try to share learnings amongst each other. And some of them do entail actually securing each other's sites. So it's about really ensuring that everyone in the field has access to learnings and information that will best help them. I wish I had a proper technical answer for you there, but that's the best I can say.
Go ahead, ma'am.
I want to talk about the future aspect of the discussion tonight. I teach future journalists. I'm a lecturer at CPUT. And what do we teach our students in light of some of the discussions that have happened about where they're going to end up and what it is they're going to do in future? So there's been mention that journalists and entrepreneurship, journalists and technology, journalists doing other things, but what are we teaching them, or what should we be teaching them in terms of the craft of journalism in light of the future that you've painted due to the funding issues and issues that, yes, there's the credibility issue, but issues that are outside of the craft of journalism that are going to affect them directly.
Can you go, Patricia?
This is it's a challenging issue. If you look at journalism and the students who leave institutions to come and join newsrooms, my observation has been that you get people who have been taught the how-to of journalism and not the content of journalism, and there is a lot of that. So once you have students that are coming into the system not knowing how the world works is a problem. And again, when you have journalists who are specialists in specific areas, it helps the newsroom. But in most cases, newsrooms in this day and age are not able to sustain this as in specialized areas within the operations. So it's another consideration that if you're going to come with specialized knowledge, it's a problem in the newsroom because there's nothing else that you can do except your bid. And it's difficult to sustain that if you are going to have specialists, even though it's been the best way to do journalism in the past. In fact, it remains so, but it's difficult to sustain financially. And once you have a journalist in the newsroom who can't tell you one institution within the Bretton Woods system, who doesn't know what the IMF is and what it's meant to do, or what the World Bank is and what it's meant to do and why it exists, when there's a story that's breaking and the person is on AIDS, and that person doesn't have a script, they're supposed to ad lib and say, this has happened from what we know. It's a problem. So we need to do more than just teach the how-to of journalism. We need to pay attention to the content in terms of how the world works in the way we design our curriculum.
Philip, is that a problem, technical knowledge?
Yes.
And
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I totally agree. Not every journalist is going to be an entrepreneur. So we're going to have organizations paying journalists and that are not entrepreneurs. But I think the technology part is changing the way we do journalism in future. And actually, with most of the journalists we work at Steady and Counterpotter, the magazine I funded, is that you need to learn as a journalist how to organize participation between your audience and yourself, because this is an integral part of the journalistic process. So it's a very variable source, and it's with Counterpotter, at least a third of the text we produce is initially, comes from audience engagement and participation, and on top of that, the content comes and so. But they really, in the journalistic schools in Germany, they are still, taught to go to big print magazines, where they write their text and then deliver the text and then it's over. In digital, that's when the process starts. The main work from our journalists is when you put out the journalism and then start participating, and then out of that developing the news story. And this is a technique that you probably teach your program attendees as well. It's really, really important. So yeah, I would say that.
Thank you. Who's got the mic? We'll take a few more questions and then wrap up.
I've got the power.
Go.
I'm
Do you mind standing?
I'm a bit devastated because I came here, I'm a bit of a dinosaur, and I came here and I thought I would get a new lease of life. I'm a correspondent for German newspapers, and what you said now, Philip, is I mean, I do everything that is wrong. So what I thought is storytelling, telling stories to German guys about Africa, how Africa works, how the atmosphere, and so that's what I'm doing. And I would have thought I could kind of defend this passionately. But what you say, I don't see me there anywhere. And I wouldn't know how to kind of get into a dialogue with my German readership, because, I mean, how? They are quite far away from me. So should I really kind of, I can kind of go into retirement now, should I do that?
I humbly disagree. It's not the end of times. You can still keep your job. Yeah. Yeah, I think what Philip is touching on in being able to engage with audiences is it's something that journalists actually inherently have. It's called empathy. Once in a while, use it actually to talk to your audience, because you'll find that you're actually better able to engage in conversations with them that can help your craft. That's it's really confounding when I've worked at newsrooms and we get into a product development process and they're like, oh, how do I talk to people, interview them? I'm like, but don't you interview politicians and business people and so and so? You can empathize. That's a skill that is, taught in journalism schools since time immemorial. So, yeah. One-on-one doesn't necessarily mean it's invaluable. In fact, it's incredibly valuable. Being able to, talk and have that, you're creating a relationship, basically. And it's much easier to do a one-to-one as opposed to ones-to-many relationship building. So I wouldn't discount what you're doing as being invaluable. Maybe not yet.
Which newspaper is it you're working for?
Okay, so let's hope that you have hope now. Who's next?
One or two more. I followed the discussion on the panel there. My concern is about public and state broadcast. I mean the government. Why today media they are trying to avoid the government, and they are telling us that the citizen on the media, the public on the media. And when we're talking about the public, those are people they are paying their taxes to government. And the money of taxes is supposed to help on this kind of issue, like journalism, like all these things.
Sorry, do you mean that journalists are too critical of their governments?
They are not critical. I think they must talk to government, and they must know which department are they working with the government. How is the budget for that department? Where is the money going from that department? Are they going to where? So they must know all these things, because that money must come to them, and they must give right information to the people and interact
So they
with
must
the
hold
people.
governments accountable.
Not holding government accountable, but talking to them.
Okay, and
But
understanding
themselves
more.
also, they must give account about that money to government. So I don't know what they have to say about that.
Does anyone want to respond?
Okay, the journalism or the brand of journalism that we are supposed to deliver as a public news service is to the benefit of the citizens. And it doesn't mean that it should be anti-government. That is not the case. We cover government, and I'm going to say this, we are invested in covering government, but in the interest of the citizens, not as a government mouthpiece. So when we talk about what citizens want to know, it's about the work of the government in their interest. So we are going to be critical of what the government is doing, because it's our responsibility as a public news service to provide critical watchdog journalism. And it's not only applicable to government, we apply to business as well, because the negative externalities that we get to see as a result of bad business practices are to the detriment of citizens. And these are all entities that we have to hold to account. So we are going to question everyone across the board, including government. But the reality is, as a public news service, we have a public interest obligation that we have to deliver to. But as to who funds it is the question that we should be answering. Because I'm going to go back to the question that I asked initially. What is the cost to our democracy if we don't fund public news service or public journalism?
Okay, I think we only have time for one more question, but the panelists will be here, right, afterwards, if you don't mind taking a few questions.
Yes.
The man with the mic, unfortunately, will have to go. Sorry for the rest of you.
No, my question is based on the history of South Africa. We are coming from a history of apartheid. So there is a lot of been happening. There's a lot of things that have been happening in the media, but I haven't seen a lot of integration and the exchange of information coming from the underprivileged media and the ones who are coming from the privileged side, especially from the rural areas. A lot of things that are happening in the rural areas are not covered in the city areas, and also vice versa. And then also a lot of guys from the disadvantaged areas, especially from the rural areas, they are not trained on how they are going to finance their media. What is the role of the big media companies, especially the SABC and the News 24, ensuring there's the integration and the training and the financing of those companies?
So maybe this should go to Carol, because she's involved in that, trying to help local rural newspapers get funding, and there is some interaction between the big guys and the little guys. Carol?
I think that is one of the biggest challenges the independent publishers are facing. There's that big disjuncture where they cover critical issues and some of the issues do not make it to mainstream, which is what the gentleman is asking. You know, there's a whole lot of issues that are happening on the ground that community media actually takes the time to cover, but they never make it to the national agenda. But we also have to understand the media landscape, you know, and we do as AIP host trainings for our members to say that how do you then escalate this issue to the national agenda? If you would know that one of our members are the ones that broke the Free the Farm story. You know,
that's a nice example.
Yeah, it was broken by an independent publisher in the Free State with little resources, and that story made it quite far. And there's many other examples.
And how did they escalate it?
How they managed to escalate it is, at the time we were running, unfortunately we don't have funds for that now, we're running an app called Stekaseli, where they would be populating all of their stories onto that website, you know, and a lot of mainstream media picked it up from there and then started running with it. So we are trying to revive that model to make sure that we get community newspapers to contribute to one portal where national media could see it, to say, let me see what is happening in the Eastern Cape today, you know, and they could then pick it up.
That is wonderful. All right, so on that note, we've got to wrap it up. Can I just ask for a round of applause for our guests? And yeah, thank you. And they will hang around for like 10 minutes, hey, just to take a few questions from those who didn't get a chance. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time and attention and for the lovely engagement. We've got some lovely tokens of thanks to thank our guests and hopefully see you next time we make an application. Just kidding. I mean, this is a diversified funding resources, right? Thank you very much. Thank you to our wonderful guests. Thank you very much. Thank you for your inspiration. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll give you a hug there. Thank you. And then a big thanks to Francis. Thank you very much for hosting our debate. Right. The third Future of Journalism debate takes place in about a month. It's the 22nd of October. And all of you better be coming because it's Media Freedom Week. So we'll have an event every night of the week or every day of the week from Monday to Friday of that week. So we expect to see you all. Venues will be changing, but that one will be here. So we look forward to seeing you there. And that's going to be looking at also really cool stuff. The impact of FANG, which is Facebook, Amazon Network, Google, what it means for our policy, what it means for broadcasting, audio-visual content. So lots of really cool and exciting questions. So thanks very much, everyone, for coming. Please stay, harass people as you see fit. Thank you.